Okay, so Princess Anne walked into the royal vault, picked up Diana's sapphire ring, and walked straight back out with it. And Camilla's representative was standing right there in that room watching it happen and could not do a single thing to stop it, because Anne was carrying a signed order directly from King Charles himself. Camilla's request was denied, the vault door closed, and the ring left in Anne's hands. So, stay with me.
Some voices are born to rule. Power is not given. This is the Royal Voice, where the crown speaks.
Welcome to the Royal Voice, where we go beyond the headlines and tell you what is really happening behind those palace walls. So let us get into it. So here is the thing, this is not a story about a piece of jewelry. I need you to understand that right from the start, because on the surface it looks like a family argument over a ring, but what actually happened inside that vault is about something much bigger. It is about who controls Diana's memory, who gets to decide what her legacy means, and whether Camilla, as queen consort, has the right to reach into Diana's story and reshape it. And the answer that came back from King Charles himself was no, absolutely not. And I have to say, the way this whole thing played out is one of the most extraordinary things I have seen from this royal family in years, because it did not happen publicly. It did not happen in a press release or a statement or a carefully managed media appearance. It happened in a vault, with a signed document, and a vault custodian who read the final line twice before turning to Camilla's representative and telling her that only Princess Anne could receive the sealed case. The room changed instantly. That is how sources are describing it. The room just changed. Okay, so let us go back to where this whole thing started, because this dispute did not begin in the vault. It began months earlier at what was supposed to be a routine private ceremony at Windsor Castle. Senior royals had gathered to review historic jewels being restored, catalogued, and assigned to different branches of the household. Completely standard stuff. The kind of administrative session that happens all the time behind palace walls and nobody ever hears about. And then Camilla paused beside Diana's sapphire ring on the inventory, and quietly, very quietly, asked that its official classification be changed. Pay attention here because this matters. Diana's sapphire ring was listed on the inventory as a protected personal legacy item, and that classification meant it could not be transferred, publicly reinterpreted, or used in any ceremony without special approval from Diana's family. That protection existed specifically to make sure nobody could take control of it without William and Harry's consent. That one line on a document was the wall between Diana's memory and anyone who might want to use it. And Camilla asked for that line to be changed. She wanted the ring reclassified as a crown-associated ceremonial asset. Which sounds like boring administrative language, right? But here is what that reclassification would actually mean. It would place the sapphire under her household's direct administration, her advisors would control how it was displayed, her office would decide the wording used to describe it publicly, her team would determine who could eventually receive it. In one reclassification, Camilla's household would gain complete control over one of the most emotionally charged objects connected to Diana's entire legacy, and Princess Anne heard every word. She set down her program immediately, turned toward Camilla, and asked in a very controlled voice whether William had approved this request. Camilla's irritation surfaced instantly. She answered that the monarchy could not preserve every painful division forever. And those words struck harder than she intended, because Anne understood in that moment that this was not about tidying up an inventory. This was about consolidating control. This was about who gets to write the final chapter of Diana's story. And then Charles said nothing. He just stood there. And his silence was its own kind of answer, because it told Camilla her request might eventually pass, and it wounded Anne in a way that set everything that followed in motion. So here is the thing about what Anne did next. She did not go to the press, she did not make a scene, she went home and started searching old custodial documents, and what she found in those documents is what changed everything. There was a dormant provision, a clause that had been sitting unused in royal legal records, that allowed the sovereign to appoint an independent family guardian for disputed personal jewels. One document, one clause, one barrier that Camilla's entire operation had not seen coming. Anne prepared it and placed it before Charles with a choice that left him absolutely no room to hide. Sign this and protect Diana's ring, or do nothing and let Camilla's household claim permanent control. That was the decision, and Charles could not avoid it this time with silence. But before Charles signed anything, something happened that I think is the most revealing moment in this entire story. Anne arranged a private confrontation. Just her and Camilla. No aides, no courtiers, no lawyers sitting in the corner taking notes. She closed the door herself, placed the unsigned custodial order on the table between them, and told Camilla exactly what was at stake. Camilla had expected a procedural discussion. She had not expected Anne to strip away every diplomatic layer and make it personal. And here is what was said in that room. Camilla accused Anne of treating her like a permanent intruder. She talked about years of public hostility, years of scrutiny, years of sitting beside Charles while being measured against a woman who was gone. And honestly, there was real pain in what she said. That pain was genuine. You could hear it, but Anne did not soften. She said this was not about Camilla's marriage or her title or her years of service. It was about placing Diana's ring under a household Diana had never belonged to, and allowing that household to shape what the sapphire meant to the world. And then Camilla made a mistake. She revealed the plan. She showed Anne an exhibition brief that her household had already prepared. Diana's sapphire was going to appear in a future royal heritage exhibition, with wording that linked Diana's era directly to Camilla's queenship, framed as continuity, framed as one story flowing naturally into the next. Camilla called it historical connection. Anne called it something else entirely. She said it was erasure polished into ceremony, because the language in that brief would have smoothed over everything. The betrayal, the grief, the years of pain, and presented it all as one seamless royal narrative with Camilla at the center. That sentence ended the conversation. Anne removed the unsigned order from the table and told Camilla Charles would decide. Then she delivered the warning. Silence would no longer count as neutrality, and that is where everything fell to Charles. The man whose signature would either protect Diana's legacy or hand Camilla the authority she had been quietly building toward for years. And I have to say, this is the moment that surprised me most about this whole story, because Charles read the document alone. He read Camilla's appeal. He read William's private note, which said only that his mother's possessions must never be used to validate anyone else's position. And then he picked up the pen. He signed the custodial order, pressed down hard, and told Anne to collect the sapphire before the administrative transfer could proceed. And look, I keep coming back to what that decision cost him personally, because this was not just a bureaucratic choice. Charles has been walking a tightrope his entire reign between his wife and his son's grief, between the woman he loves and the memory of the woman whose loss shaped his children forever. And for years he managed that tightrope by saying nothing, by letting palace systems and carefully chosen language carry the weight. But Anne forced him into a room where silence was no longer an option, and he chose Diana's family. He chose William. He drew the line. So Anne walked into the vault with that signed order. The custodian read it, read the last line twice, looked at Camilla's representative, and told her only Anne could receive the sealed case. And Anne did something interesting when the case was placed in front of her. She did not touch the ring immediately. She just looked at it, because she was not thinking about the dispute or the document or the victory. She was thinking about Diana, the woman whose absence had shaped every private fracture inside this family for decades. Camilla received the news at Clarence's house, and here's the detail that tells you everything about how deeply this cut. She had expected delay. She had expected resistance. She had not expected a personal rejection backed by the monarch's own signature. Her request was denied. The ring had left the vault, and she was excluded from every future decision concerning it. And the thing that made it worse was that Charles had chosen Anne's custody over her access, and no advisor could explain to her whether he had done it from guilt, or conviction, or family pressure, or fear of what she intended for Diana's legacy. The king remained silent after signing, which is itself a statement. But then a second document arrived at Clarence's house, and this is where it gets really interesting, because Charles's order did not just place the sapphire in Anne's custody. It suspended every pending request from Camilla's household involving Diana's private jewels until a new family review could be completed. In one stroke, her entire heritage project stopped. Every request her office had been quietly building for months was now frozen. Collection staff immediately halted the planned exhibition, sealed the related inventories, canceled the scheduled review of Diana-linked items. Camilla read the suspension notice at her desk, removed her glasses slowly, and asked her private secretary to leave the room. She would not let anyone watch while the full weight of that decision settled over her, and she called Charles directly. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. She asked whether he understood what the suspension would suggest about her place within the family. He told her the boundary was necessary. She ended the call before emotion could take over her voice. And Charles sat there with the receiver in his hand, knowing he had just opened a wound inside his marriage to protect a wound that had been open for 27 years. Now here is what happened next, and this is the part that I think matters most for what this whole situation actually means. Anne did not keep the ring. She did not put it in her own collection or hand it to some palace archive. She asked William to meet her alone. No aides, no official minutes. Just the two of them and the sealed case she had carried from the vault. William recognized the inventory mark before she even opened it, and for a moment neither of them spoke, because this was not a royal transaction. This was a son and an aunt sitting with the physical memory of a woman they both loved and failed to protect in different ways. Anne proposed a family trust, a legal arrangement that would tie the ring permanently to Diana's direct descendants. William would become the principal guardian. Anne would retain independent oversight, and no royal consort, not Camilla, not any future queen, could display, transfer, rename, or reinterpret the ring without written approval from Diana's family line. The protection was permanent. The restriction was absolute. William looked at the ring for a long time. And then he said something that I think tells you everything about who he is becoming. He said the sapphire must never become a weapon against Camilla. But Diana's story could not be reshaped simply to make others more comfortable. Protection without revenge. Memory without humiliation. A boundary strong enough to survive changing titles. And Anne lifted her hand from the case. That gesture ended emergency custody and began permanent family guardianship. William accepted it not with triumph but with the quiet weight of a son receiving something far greater than jewelry. The palace statement the next morning was restrained. It confirmed Diana's sapphire had been removed from general royal custody, placed under Anne's protection, and transferred into a family trust controlled by Diana's descendants. The language was careful. The public reaction was not. By morning, it was everywhere. One newspaper ran a full-page image of Diana wearing sapphire jewelry under the headline "Anne draws the line." Outside Kensington Palace, people began tying blue ribbons to the gates. Within hours, the railings were lined with sapphire color. Camilla watched the coverage in silence. She felt wounded by the suggestion that she had tried to take another woman's legacy. But she also understood that challenging the story would only deepen that impression. She turned off the broadcast, but the headline was impossible to escape. And here is what I want you to take away from all of this. Because the ring was never really the point. The ring was the moment where a question the royal family had been avoiding for 27 years finally forced its way into the open. Can Camilla, as queen consort, as the woman Charles chose, as the woman who has sat beside him through everything, can she absorb Diana's story into her own? Can she use Diana's legacy to complete her own narrative? And the answer that came back from Charles, from Anne, from William was no. Two women can belong to royal history without one being used to complete the other. That is the verdict. And it took a sapphire ring, a signed custodial order, and Princess Anne walking into a vault to finally say it out loud. The vault door is closed. The ring is with Diana's family, and Camilla's household has been told in the clearest possible terms that Diana's memory is not territory. It never was, and it never will be. That is all for today here at The Royal Voice. If this is your first time with us, make sure you subscribe, because we are always going to tell you what is really happening behind those palace walls. And I will see you in the next one.